Welcome, my friends. Oh, what a beautiful spring it is to have another episode of the top 10 favorite and from what I believe are the best performances of some of the greatest actresses of all time. Do you remember, Smithy? Yes, I'm starting from 10 and then discovering radium all the way up to number 1. Not really, but you bet your legs. I have seen every film attainable of these artists, so every list here comes from truthful, elegant, and passionate accuracy. Happy Easter, ladies and gentlemen, and today we are talking about one of the great underrated English artists of the classic film age. She is the great and utterly exquisite Greer Garson. Born as Eileen Evelyn Greer Garson in Essex, England, she was more of Scottish and Irish descent. How could you miss it with her Irish green eyes and her fiery red hair? At King's College London, she became more fascinated in literary classics from the 18th century and became very involved in arts, though she possessed a working woman's work ethic. She got her work going at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre, where she learned the essentials of an actor. In her own words, an expressive countenance, an uninhibited nature, even being tutored by the great Laurence Olivier. She excited more audiences with productions of Mademoiselle and Page from a Diary, where Louis B. Mayer caught her in London, looking for new talent. She was instantly signed on with MGM in 1937, and it was a rough start, but slowly but surely, in 2 years, she would make a breakthrough on screen that would light up our spirits. Every time, folks, I see Greer Garson on screen, sincerely, I always believe she would light up the stars. She was one of those artists that was key in playing historical figures in some of the most popular biopics Hollywood would make. And what helped is how even though her movie star status and method of portraying characters would be kind of put on, however, she would bring a sincere depth to them, which is why she was one of America's top 10 box office draws during the 1940s. Yes, we are only talking about film here, but Greer Garson was never a stranger when it came to appearing on television, with her supporting roles on The Love Boat, The Virginian, and the miniseries of Little Women, playing Aunt Catherine. Not to mention replacing Rosalind Russell in the Broadway production of Auntie Mame. She was always the elegant presence on screen, with her luscious red hair, her gorgeous smile, and prominent intelligence, much in the same wave of Deborah Kerr, and like Vivien Leigh, and more. But what makes her even more special was her beautifully trained voice for theater, and how much you could feel the confidence, the love, and the strength of a woman who wanted and fought for the best. So get ready, folks, as we talk about the top 10 best performances of the woman of strength herself, Greer Garson. Now, starting off at number 10, we have Jane Austen's classic Hollywood adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, released in 1940, which, to be honest, folks, isn't that great of an adaptation, which I believe all Jane Austenites who've seen it can agree wholeheartedly, right? Granted, it's more of the stage adaptation that was formed by Helen Jerome, but there is just that lovely essence of the book that's still missing from the film. I mean, when you try to turn a phenomenal book about social satire into a romantic comedy, you're missing something. However, that still doesn't stop it from having wonderful performances, with Greer Garson playing the classic lead Elizabeth Bennet, one of 5 unmarried daughters of the Bennet abode, but may have a chance with her new neighbor, Mr. Darcy, played by the great Laurence Olivier. Yes, of course, Greer was the wrong choice to play this role. Let's be honest. Being clearly too old to play Elizabeth, being 36 at the time, when her character is 20. But imagine if things went to plan with Norma Shearer. Did I say it right? You're welcome. Norma Shearer in the role with Robert Donat, or Clark Gable, who were slated to play Darcy, with George Cukor directing. The unfortunate and sudden death of producer Irving Thalberg halted production, since he was going to produce it, but director Robert Z. Leonard adds some lovely touches to it, given to the direction he was ordered to do. Same as Greer. It's horrible they cut a lot of her great lines in the book to give her more sass and guts. But once again, Greer does very, very well with it to give it a bright energy, making it still enjoyable and fun, earning her the National Board of Review for Best Actress. Number 9, Julius Caesar. This Oscar-winning classic and fantastic American adaptation of Shakespeare's phenomenal power play features Garson in a small supporting role as Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, in a cast that is utterly sensational, with Brando as Mark Antony, James Mason as Brutus, John Gielgud as Cassius, Edmund O'Brien as Casca, Lewis Calhern as Caesar, and Deborah Kerr as Portia. However, Garson has so many great moments with her minimal screen time as the beloved Calpurnia. The scene where she's trying to comfort Caesar and warn him of her own premonitions within the Ides of March is very moving, and she pulls it off with such ease and presence. Number 8, The Valley of Decision. A classic case of a romantic story that is prohibited mainly because of the difference of class. Greer Garson, in her 6th Academy Award nominated performance for Best Actress as a poor Irish maid, Mary, who works for the Scott family, who own the steel mill where her father works at. And what do you know? She ends up falling in love with the wealthy son, Paul, played by Gregory Peck, which complicates things even more, leading to a strike at the mill with her father involved. Based on the novel by Marcia Davenport, this was another role that showed Garson as the standard supportive wife and companion that was always typecast. But every time she came on screen, folks, she would still electrify the drama. The film is not necessarily the greatest, but when you have an ensemble cast like this with Beck, Donald Crisp, Gladys Cooper, Lionel Barrymore, Jessica Tandy, and young Dean Stockwell making his debut, you can't go wrong. But it's Garson that shines a light with integrity and such a vulnerable truth that makes it touching. Number 7, Blossoms in the Dust. The lovely and poignant biopic with Greer Garson in her 2nd Academy Award nominated performance for Best Actress as the inspirational Edna Gladney, who fights for children's rights and opens her own orphanage to help children find homes and change the term of illegitimate children on their birth certificates in Texas so they could be treated like natural children. The film indeed takes a lot of dramatic liberties for the story, incorporating the sister character played very well by Marcia Hunt to take on the illegitimate children aspect that she was going through, whereas it was the real Gladney who experienced that. But at the end of the day, this is one heartfelt and gripping film, thanks to Garson adding a lot of gravity to the role of Edna. The film can drag a bit, and to be honest, this is one case where the Technicolor can be a little distracting, at least for me. It can be a little too much sometimes. However, Garson, in her first collaboration with her famous co-star of technically 9 films, Walter Pidgeon, is outstanding. Nominated for 4 Oscars total, including Best Picture, winning for Best Art Direction. Funny enough, this is a performance from Garson that is just as powerful today, especially if anyone didn't know the story and impact of the real Edna Gladney. Number 6, Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Oh, such a moving picture that features Greer Garson not only in her true breakout role as Miss Cathy, but her first Oscar-nominated performance for Best Actress. It's amazing to know that Myrna Loy turned down the role, which gives Garson the opportunity to shine in a performance that is a little under 25 minutes of screen time. She technically could be categorized as Best Supporting Actress, but with Garson in the role, she captivates the viewer from the moment she enters on those mountains. She is such the driving force of inspiration for Mr. Chipping, aka Mr. Chips, played endearingly and superbly by Robert Donat in his Oscar-winning performance, beating out Jeremy Starr for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. No, I'm not bitter. I mean, honestly, I'm not, because Robert Donat's performance is truly worthy of it. Garson was actually offered a contract by MGM, but refused so many roles until she received this role, because she knew she couldn't turn a role of a lifetime like this down as a feisty suffragette. I love every one of their scenes together, Donut and Garson, especially with how she builds Chips up by assuring him he could become headmaster of the school as long as he believes in himself. She had one of the most soothing and commanding and motherly voices I've ever heard in film, moving up to one of the most iconic moments when she has to leave on the train and she says, "Goodbye, Mr. Chips," which of course gets a callback at the end. She kisses him, and on the train she leaves with him chasing after her. "Oh, you can't go now. Oh, do you want to marry me? Oh, do I?" But then off she goes. God, her face is just heartbreaking, just as Donut's is. And I can't spoil her character's arc if you haven't seen it. It's one of those breakout performances that made such an imprint on the power of the actor. Number 5, Mrs. Parkington. A delightful and quite exquisite picture starring Garson in her 5th Academy Award nominated performance for Best Actress, playing the lovely title character, Mrs. Susie Parkington, who starts out the film as an elderly, rich, high society widow trying to put up with her spoiled children and grandchildren, one of whom played amazingly by Gladys Cooper in a role you never see her in, which is fantastic. But she recounts her upbringing as a lonely maid and then swept off her feet by the rich mine owner, Augustus Parkington, played of course by Walter Pidgeon, in technically their 5th film together. He convinces his ex-lover and friend, the Baroness Conti, played brilliantly by Agnes Moorehead, in an Oscar-nominated performance to build her up and make his new bride, Mrs. Parkington, a New York classy socialite. And her transformation from matron to magnificence is astounding. Made at the time of Greer Garson's big peak in film, this gave her a great opportunity to play a character of great range and to have it span 50 plus years. It's amazing to see how grounded and real she made the elderly makeup on her, which proves how versatile an artist she really was. Number 4, Mrs. Miniver. Now I know, this is very much a controversial slot to put this iconic Oscar-winning picture at number 4. And ladies and gentlemen, sure, it may deserve to be much, much higher considering how much this film, but more importantly, how much Greer Garson's Oscar-winning performance for Best Actress made such an impact during World War II. Based on the classic novel, which was a magazine article at first, it tells the inspirational story of a loving family in London and how they overcame the first couple months of World War II. Performance-wise, Greer Garson gives a very sensitive, poignant, and valuably strong performance as Kay Miniver, a housewife who takes care of her family and notably her garden with such love and attention. And once the war breaks out, the inner strength has to come through to carry the family unit forward. As a film altogether, honestly, it's a bit too soft and sentimental, even for me. Director William Wyler, who even won the Oscar for directing it, said it wasn't too accurate to the effects of war after he signed up and served during the war. Personally, the best piece of acting Greer gives in the film is the most famous scene between Kay Miniver and the German pilot that crashes near her garden, and she feeds him by gunpoint, and the taunt that the pilot gives her drives her to defend herself, slapping him even, and then disarming him, followed by calling the police. It's such a well-crafted scene by Wyler, and Garson gets her chance to show some balls, so to speak. The sequence where Greer and Teresa Wright in her Oscar-winning performance for Best Supporting Actress, which, I'm sorry, I don't agree with, are sitting in their car watching a dogfight. Wyler zooms in and then boom, plane crashes right in front of them. Total surprise. It's the best shot in the whole film, and Garson still carries the film with such confidence and strength that sure, a lot of audiences hadn't really seen before. Being the second film she and fellow Oscar nominee for Best Actor, Walter Pidgeon, made together, you can tell from this collaboration they were destined to work together 7 more times. They just radiate beautiful chemistry, which is erupting on the screen here. In the end, the film itself is just filled with too much propaganda, which yes, this was such a hard war. And as Winston Churchill and President FDR said, this film did more for the war than 100 warships. More than anything, specifically the sermon at the very end of the film, really pumped audiences up to support their war and defend their country with every last breath, which is fantastic and inspirational. But the final product, at least to me, and actually to others, became just that, a whole big commercial. Because the film was so successful, earning 6 Oscars total and spawning a sequel 8 years later, it took away any distraction of the fact that Greer Garson would actually marry actor Richard Ney, who portrays her son in the film. Despite not wanting the role in the first place, Greer Garson is more commonly known for her strong performance here, which, hilarious enough, her Oscars acceptance speech holds the record for being the longest, clocking in at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. But yes, is very powerful given to the time and place of where the world was within the throes of World War II. Number 3, Sunrise at Campo Bello. One of the greatest films about a president and his wife, with Greer Garson earning her 7th and final Oscar nomination for Best Actress as the one and only Eleanor Roosevelt, taking precious care of her husband, the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, played absolutely wonderfully by Ralph Bellamy, recreating his Tony Award-winning performance on Broadway in the play of which this film was based on. The film was not such a gigantic hit because at the time of 1960, film was already changing, and a film version of a play that showed FDR stricken with polio before the war years in the 1920s just wasn't on everyone's minds, so to speak. The film, even today, receives more flack for the overly theatrical characterizations from both Bellamy and Garson. It just didn't translate well to film from the stage. And while I can agree with most of those assessments, I still value Garson's performance as utterly thorough and commanding, using the dental appliance to simulate Eleanor Roosevelt's overbite to the mannered effort to replicate the lilt of her speech, which didn't seem too much to me. She earned a Golden Globe for her vibrant and believable work here, while Bellamy received even no nomination? Oh, come on now. I mean, it was a tough year, I'll give it that, but a nod, it would have been fitting. At the end of the day, Garson's giving portrayal is the main highlight of this heartfelt classic, which Eleanor Roosevelt herself approved of when she visited on set quite often. Number 2, Madame Curie. In my opinion, and in the opinion of others across the nation, one of the best historical biopics ever made, with Greer Garson giving such a strong leading performance, which earned her her 4th Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. She plays, of course, the title character, Madame Marie Curie, the famous Polish-French physicist who, along with her husband Pierre, a fellow physicist played wonderfully again by Walter Pidgeon, also in an Oscar-nominated performance, tried to isolate a radioactive substance Marie has identified as radium, all within the backdrop of the turn of the century in Paris. Technically, their third and, in my opinion, best collaboration together, for they add such sincere layers to their respective characters that in real life made such amazing movements in science with radium. Based on the book by Marie Curie's daughter, the film, of course, takes more dramatic liberties of her real life, but did better factually than most biopics at that time, receiving great updated dialogue by the one and only F. Scott Fitzgerald, originally slated for Irene Dunne, Greta Garbo, and famously, Joan Crawford, who turned it down in such a huff, classic Joan, but thankfully Greer Garson took it on, even though she was physically too tall to play Madame Curie. But what mattered most, and what always matters, is bringing truth to the character. Greer is just fantastic in the role, and is captivating from the word go, that I almost believe she should have received the Oscar that year. But yes, Jennifer Jones was indeed amazing in her film debut with The Song of Bernadette. Many such stories have been made about this amazing icon, Marie Curie, but nothing like this one. If you haven't had the pleasure of seeing this 7-time Oscar-nominated film, which includes even Best Picture. I highly recommend it, more so for Greer Garson's powerful portrayal. And now, my darlings, here are some honorable mentions. The Singing Nun, which is quite a fun semi-autobiographical musical drama with great comedy bits thanks to the always amazing Agnes Moorehead, but Greer pops in here as Mother Prioress, who is against Sister Anne's amazing talent, joy, and mission to sing delightful folk songs across the world, getting the support from Ed Sullivan and becoming a big sensation that's not exactly the word of God, as her habit is supposed to be. Debbie Reynolds is just wonderful as usual, and the story of the real nun, Janine Deckers, is actually really quite fascinating and tragic, who committed suicide with her female partner because of financial problems, most likely due to the record companies. The story was also dramatized later in a film called Sister Smile, but this one is definitely way more fun and lighthearted, with Greer Garson adding more gravitas to the role of a mother superior figure. Julia Misbehaves, a fun romantic comedy with Garson and Pigeon paired up once again in technically their 6th collaboration together as a separated husband and wife who are reunited for the wedding of their daughter, played by a 16-year-old Elizabeth Taylor. So, will something be rekindled? People have said Garson was still very wrong for this role, but at the time of 1948, Garson needed something to connect to more audiences without doing dramas all the time, to get away from her iconic Miniver portrayal. And quite honestly, when you always pair her with Walter Pidgeon, they always did fantastic work together. Her acrobatic number is quite hilarious, since here she's doing an acrobatic number with her high heels. That's quite professional. But Garson is really swell here, considering she always regretted not being considered for more comedies than drama. That Forsight Woman, or known in the UK as the Forsight Saga, based on the John Galsworthy novel series of the same name, which became a sensational series with one made in 1967, and then the most famous one in 2002 with Damian Lewis. This one is quite an efficient entry, with Greer and Errol Flynn in one of his best performances personally, as Mr. and Mrs. Forsyte, set during the Victorian era, with Irene Garson having no love for Soames Flynn, since she's more of a precious possession of his than a companion. So the twists and turns and love affairs, love triangles continue on within the family, which is quite wild, but exciting drama. Garson is very effective here, as you would expect, and she and Errol have wonderful chemistry together. They apparently got along wonderfully together on set and would always have tea time together. Tea for Garson, gin for Flynn. Their fiery chemistry is quite alive when you watch this picture. Also, picture number 7 of Greer and Walter Pidgeon. The Little Foxes, the 1956 made-for-television adaptation, sponsored and produced heavily by Hallmark, Hall of Fame, if you couldn't tell by all the freaking commercials. But this is such a dynamic adaptation, with Greer as Regina Giddens, made famous on Broadway by Tallulah Bankhead, of course, and then on film by the iconic Bette Davis. Garson is really great here as Regina because she's lovely enough in the beginning, but we do see her sink in that fiery witch with a capital B mindset who only yearns to take control of the family fortune from her sickly husband Horace at the turn of the century of Cotton Country. All her scenes with French Otone are so genuine. She's very simple, so we can never expect her to copy off of Bette Davis. We only can see her really portray Regina as a silent snake, which she still works with very effectively here. Adventure, a little romantic drama / comedy with Garson and Gable, a tagline that said, "Gable's back and Garson's got him," which was a play on the fact that this was the first movie Gable made when he returned home from war. Gable hated that tagline, so he said, why don't we do "He put the arson in Garson"? At that production meeting, Greer immediately quipped in, "Then say she put the Abel in Gable," which everyone loved except Gable. So the original tagline stayed. Based on the novel The Anointed, it's a simple story about a sailor falling in love with a librarian, Greer being the librarian, and they both have pretty good chemistry. It's not as electric as most pairings of Gables and Garsons for that matter, but Garson in particular adds enough fire in there to keep us interested and invested. It's one of those performances that becomes better than the actual film she's in. And that's a mark of a great actress who didn't intentionally wanted to steal the picture away. She just naturally did by being amazing. Number 1, of course, ladies and gentlemen, Random Harvest. How could it not be? Not only is it the best film Greer Garson was ever in, her performance as Paula is just iconic and is one of the most iconic when it comes to the best romantic dramas that has ever touched film. AFI still ranks this film as one of the 100 greatest love stories of all time, based on the novel by James Hilton, who actually wrote the novel of Goodbye, Mr. Chips. It is the romantic story of how World War I POW vet Smithy, played amazingly by Ronald Colman in an Oscar-nominated performance. And yes, that is how you pronounce his name, Ronald Colman versus Coleman, there you go, whose memory is already completely foggy. He meets and falls in love with the lovely traveling artist Paula Garson, lives a happy life, wanting to get married, until he is struck by a taxi, unfortunately, and his memory is erased past the war again, but then restored as he finds out he is Charles Rainier, the wealthy son of a businessman, and goes back to a life he never really knew, leaving Paula frantically worried about her Smithy. She discovers his new life in a magazine as the Industrial Prince of England, so she applies to work for him, hoping her presence will revitalize his memory, to no avail. So she will try to rebuild their relationship organically and hopefully have him fall back in love with her, even as he is betrothed to Kitty, played brilliantly by Susan Peters, also in an Oscar-nominated performance. The film received 7 total Oscar nominations, winning none, but what is clearly missing in this film's accolades is the nomination for Greer Garson for Best Actress. Many historians have speculated, and I agree wholeheartedly, that Greer Garson's nomination and win for Mrs. Miniver was in substitution for her phenomenal performance here in Random Harvest, because Mrs. Miniver was more of the quote-unquote important picture that everyone needed at that time, for sure. But Greer has way more to play with here, more of a challenge to work with, because her character Paula has to go from knowing and loving the man she would spend the rest of her life with to now being an amnesiac. She wants to rebuild their relationship from scratch and have him fall back in love with her because she can't live without him. She and Ronald Colman got along wonderfully while making the film, as they both said this was one picture they wish they never stopped making. They were both very involved with the script, actually, giving suggestions to director Mervyn LeRoy, whom Garson worked with 4 times. You can tell they were really invested in this story, which still awakens the human soul, especially with its ending, which if you haven't seen it, folks, oh my God, I will not spoil it for you. It must be seen to really be experienced, just to capture the depth of love that Greer gives this film. Every time I think of Greer Garson, I always think of her performance here. For when I first saw it when I was even 15 years old, my romantic spirit soared, and I was just utterly inspired with what could transpire in romantic films like this. It's a clear example why Greer Garson herself felt this was her favorite of all the films she did. The actor has such an amazingly inspirational life after she semi-retired in the late 60s, marrying a millionaire oilman and horse breeder, breeding horses in their home in New Mexico, but also would give so much to the Greer Garson Theater at the Southern Methodist University in Dallas, where she also received an honorary Doctor of Arts degree in 1991. Also being awarded the Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1993 for her services to drama and entertainment. Did I also mention she even considered running for freaking Congress in the 1960s? I mean, she was a real Renaissance woman. This artist really accomplished a lot within her life, but of course the public eye will, for the most part, remember her as not only Mrs. Miniver, but a strong-willed fighter of a woman who represented such resilience and passion. And to this day, folks, she shall be remembered as one of the great actresses of the golden age of Hollywood. Yes, I think it's lovely having flowers named after you as well, my friends. So tell me, do you agree with my picks? What are your favorite performances by this amazing and still underrated artist, Greer Garson? Please share in those comments below. It always makes me happy. Please click like if you like this, subscribe, and we have movie reviews happening on the Patreon page, which you can subscribe in the link below. You really don't want to miss this, my friends. But in the meantime, thank you ever so much for watching, and always remember, my friends, to keep the classics alive.